Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we focus on benchmark CG 3.10, in which we will identify sources and types of law. In Part 1, we focus on describing historical codes of law that influence the United States. Benchmark Clarification 1 asks students to explain how historical codes of law influence the United States. So first we're going to ask our question, what are these historical codes of law? And then answer how they have influenced the United States. So we're going to be first focusing our attention on the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi was a written code of rules in the ancient society of Babylon, dating back to 1772 BC. So this is many thousands of years ago. The code included 282 laws. In this Code of Hammurabi, each crime was given a specific punishment depending on a person's social position. These laws created order and guided people in their everyday lives. So imagine, if you will, that with each crime being given a specific punishment based on a person's social position, this would play a role in how people decided whether or not to commit a crime, right? There's a code of rules, and a person would know in advance that if they broke the code of rules based on their social position, they would know what the punishment was. And so that might play a role in terms of their decision whether or not they're going to violate that particular rule. And so consequently, we see this notion of crime and punishment at play, the Code of Hammurabi, because people not only knew what the rules were, but they also knew what the punishments were. It's one thing to know what the rules are and to not know what the punishments are, because a person might decide, well, I'm going to break the rules and hope that the punishment isn't bad and it'll be worth breaking the rule. When in reality, if the person knows what the punishment is, that might make them less likely to break the rule, especially if it's a punishment that they do not like and they do not believe would be a good idea for them to have to experience. Next, we have a focus on the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was a government document that limited the power of the King of England. It was written by a group of English nobles in 1215. So if we think about the Code of Hammurabi, that was over 3,000 years before the Magna Carta. So we see a long period of time between these two documents, but in both instances, we're talking about somebody limiting someone's power. The Code of Hammurabi focused on limiting the power of the people, limiting the behavior of the people specifically, and here the Magna Carta was intended to limit the power, to limit the abuse of power of the King of England. By doing so, by limiting the power of the King of England, the rights of the English nobility were protected. So a group of English nobles, in essence, protected themselves, and they protected themselves by writing the Magna Carta, limiting the power of the King of England. So what was the impact of the Code of Hammurabi and the Magna Carta in the United States? Right? The Code of Hammurabi was Babylonian, the Magna Carta was English. So how does this affect the United States? And considering that both of these documents were hundreds, if not thousands of years before the United States was established, it's a really important question to see how did these older law codes have an impact on the U.S. when it formed itself in the 1770s and has continued to form itself with the U.S. Constitution, as well as the amendments to the Constitution that have come since then, many of which deal with people who are accused of committing crimes. So let's first look at the Code of Hammurabi. Each crime was given a specific punishment, which created order. Certainly this approach is reflected in U.S. law, that people are well aware of what the penalties are for violating U.S. law based on the fact that these laws are in place, that the punishments are written down, so people can have a reasonable expectation as to what might happen to them if they break a law. With that said, the Magna Carta is reflected in some of the rights that were later added to the U.S. Constitution through the amendment process. For example, the Magna Carta, by limiting the power of the king, also then guarantees due process to people who were accused of crimes. And there is a due process clause in the 5th and the 14th Amendments. So we see that the Code of Hammurabi, the idea that people know in advance or can find out in advance what the punishment might be for a law that they break, but know that if they are arrested and prosecuted, that the government is limited as to how the government can treat them because of guarantees of due process that were reflected in the Magna Carta. So we see that even though the Code of Hammurabi, the Magna Carta, and the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all happen at different points of time, some hundreds of years apart, some thousands of years apart, some decades apart, nonetheless had connections to each other. Thank you for joining me today for Middle School Civics Highlights. If you still have questions, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.